Good morning. Welcome to Denby Pottery. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you all this morning. I promise to keep it brief. Firstly, thank you to you guys for venturing out. It's really appreciated. I hope you're all well. You've enjoyed your morning so far. Massive thank you to Hannah and CreativeMornings, of course, and also to Gavin Lewis, who's allowed us this morning to be here, and to Lynn Salt, our amazing curator, who some of you may have met in the museum. Unfortunately, I didn't get to hear the talk. I'm going to go back later and see if I can catch it. My name's Gary. I'm design manager. I've been here for 27 years, and it's in the blood. So I grew up in Derbyshire, and I remember eating off and drinking out of Denby as a young boy. And I'm proud to say I pretty much have done ever since. This morning, I'd like to talk to you about something really dear to my own heart, and that's the importance of touch. It's a huge significance to me as a designer, be it the raw materials, the texture, the weight, even down to using a keyboard, a pencil, or a brushstroke. So considering we're in a cafe, the humble act of drinking seems as good a place to start as any this morning. So if you're currently enjoying your coffee or tea, or maybe you did so earlier, I'd like you to consider the following: how the cup felt on your lips. It's a simple act in the grand scheme of things, but it's a gesture that really fires our sense of touch, one that's so acute or imperceivable we just take it for granted. But our sense of touch informs. It gives us depth to everything around us. Touch enlightens our senses. It can be the start of the day, in this case through the simple act of drinking, but in turn encourage communal discussion and bring us closer together. Touch constantly invites us to consider the objects and people we encounter. Alternatively, if you've just gulped down your drink without a second thought, a huge thank you for helping to keep me in a job. This morning I wanted to touch on my role, and I apologise, that's the last time I'll use it as a pun. And no more, I promise. How we use traditional skills, trends analysis, technology to bring together and breathe life into the ware that we produce. As a designer, I'm privileged to spend most of my time in the Denby's design studio, and I think it's fair to say it's as close to a studio pottery as you will find. It just so happens that I have to constantly be mindful there's also a huge factory creating over 100,000 pots a week just behind the doors. And in the pottery work technicians, potters, craftsmen, information technology, purchasing, quality, marketing, customer service, and finance, the guys who decide how much your mug or plate will cost, and countless other amazing people who all use touch to bring objects to life. From the keyboards to the raw clay, through to the reactive glazes and hand decoration we apply to the ware we produce. This morning, I'll hopefully demonstrate how our potters create samples so we can make informed aesthetic decisions, how our designers work with glaze technicians to bring beauty to their product, and how we try to bring it all together in a way that's sympathetic to over 200 years worth of making pots. But throughout the whole process, how touch remains at its core and remains the common denominator. So, the first question I'm always asked, what's it like to be a designer at Denby? It's bittersweet. I'm passionate about pots. I'm a self-proclaimed pottery geek, but working in the pottery industry, you have to grow a thick skin. Designs are constantly questioned by colleagues, by managers, at internal meetings, and ultimately by customers. And that's quite rightly so. Ideas are born, reworked, constantly refined, hopefully improved. Inevitably, the best and the worst part about the job is working in a large team of people who are more than happy to offer advice and celebrate achievements, or conversely, to bestow criticism and ground ideas. To rightly ask the difficult questions: does the product look great? Can it be improved? Does it function? If it's a teapot, for instance, does it pour well? Is the handle comfortable to hold? You won't be surprised to know that over my time at Denby, I've made countless mistakes and learned many valuable lessons. I vividly remember a time when I sat, head in hands, listening to a focus group passionately debate for over an hour if the rim of a plate would hold enough gravy. At the time, I remember being angry. To me, the question seemed trivial. Being young and pretentious, I didn't think they appreciated the purity of design, and I was a bit dismissive. How could these people be so narrow-minded? My pride was hurt, and I didn't see the benefits of reflection. I was too focused on what I thought they'd missed. I'd lost sight of practicality. I'm mindful now as a designer to always strive for things that are functional as much as they are beautiful. One of my first projects was to design a water jug, Exhibit A. The brief was simple enough: And after demonstrating several ideas, the final sample was presented to the company MD and board of directors. Unfortunately for me, the sample selected had also blown a big hole in the kiln on the base. So when it was held up, it resembled a telescope. There was a literal hole in my bucket. Not a great start. It's an embarrassing moment. But again, the lesson I learned was to always double check samples before they make it to the final review. And the lessons don't always finish at the doors of the factory. Whenever I visit someone new and they settle down to talk, they invariably ask the same question: what do you do? When they find out I work as a designer at Denby, the conversation always goes along the lines of, oh, you work at Denby. Just hold on right there. I'll be back in a minute. And then there's an awkward silence where I'm left unaccompanied in the living room or the lounge while they rush into the back kitchen with shouts of, hold on, I had it here a minute ago, I'll be back in a second. Then there's usually a rattle and they return and holding the Holy Grail in front of me. How wonderful to have this object. This is my... But sometimes it's not even Denby, which can be a little bit awkward, I can say. Before the inevitable question, Gary, how much is it worth? What a great open question. What's the value of an object? And this is where it gets interesting for me. So after the initial disappointment of finding out that their 1930s Maiolica teapot or piggy bank in green, and as basically their treasured heirloom isn't going to pay off the mortgage that's sunk in, there's a huge shift in the dynamic. I get really excited, my hand's on the shape, and I get to talk about, in my mind, the pot's real values. The glaze reaction, the relationship between the handle and spout, the story behind the object, how it was made, and I'm excited to hold something that would normally only ever see behind the glass in a museum. How the pot's been hand cast or made on a jolly, machine made or hand turned. I love to talk about pots, and even better if it's beautifully crafted. So you get the idea, I'm passionate about pots. Of course, no matter how enthusiastically I may excel the qualities of Granny's teapot, I'm now forever going to be held responsible for the firstborn's lack of a private education. Which leads me nicely on. That's my role, and all the good people at Denby, to make everything seamless, that it just works, that you enjoy your interaction with the mug, and inside a large pottery, as I say, we're blessed with a huge, amazing team of people working away. Inevitably, what joins us all together, though, as this morning, is it's all about the object that we hold in front of us, and the response it promotes. So as you're here, drinking tea or coffee and having a chat. For those of you that had opportunity to have a go at throwing this morning, getting your hands dirty and the pleasure of feeling clay between your fingers, I hope you enjoyed a sense of achievement as you stood back and admired your handiwork. I can't wait to see everything later. The clay slowly drying on your hands. Some of you may have a newfound appreciation for the level of skill required. But even if your masterpiece wasn't what you initially hoped for, I hope you really enjoyed the childlike joy of forming raw clay into something tangible. Bernard Leach, regarded as the father of studio pottery, wrote, "A potter is one of the few people left who uses his natural faculties of heart, head, and hand in balance." And I truly believe that. The next question I'm usually asked is, where do you draw inspiration from? And the answer, of course, is everywhere. As designers, we travel to museums, galleries, and you're going to ask me, how often do I do that? Well, as often as time allows. Before I started at Denby, I was lucky enough to spend 10 weeks on a work placement in Paris at a porcelain manufacturer. And every day I was encouraged to go across the road to the Louvre, which was literally just across the road from the Rue Royale. It's not a bad gig. And of course, when I'd finished at the Louvre, there was always the Musée d'Orsay when that exhausted everything. And when Wedgwood launched their collection, their now sadly closed museum at Barlaston, and it's currently in the V&A, so I'd encourage anybody to go down and have a look at it. I visited regularly, in fact, so regularly that the tour guides used to think that I was a designer for Wedgwood and would let me in for free. Don't tell anybody. So as a business, we subscribe to a trends website, but we also prefer, as a department, not to follow it religiously. Rather, we use it as a sense to check what our findings are. We look at nature, magazines and books, and we also ask visitors to the design studio to give opinion on new ranges. At times, I'm sure all you creators will relate, it's very difficult not to switch off, as inspiration can come from everywhere. We also have an amazing archive. A lot of our designs are born from looking back. I hope you had time to talk to Lynn this morning and take a good look around our museum. And after finding inspiration, and before we start creating anything, we usually produce mood boards and drawings. I brought along one just at the front there, hopefully some of you can see. And we use these to explain to other designers, decision makers in the business or customers what our intention is. We retain all the mood boards and sketchbooks, document our ideas, and inspiration as this inevitably becomes the story we tell. Where and how the idea first appeared. This mood board particularly was used as part of a trends presentation to the business, and we used it to show off the influence modern deco was having on interiors. This in turn led to a new range of porcelain tableware, I've got here, called Modern Deco, inspirationally. This went on to win the Tableware International's Award of Excellence last year for casual tableware. It's a beautiful pattern created by my colleague Lisa Minette. And looking back, it's easy to see the pathway between the hours of research that led to the mood board and eventually the products, and this supports a compelling story and a marketing campaign. I've also brought along some props to demonstrate how we work with our stoneware. We've got 100,000 tons of raw clay sitting at the back of the factory, weathering away every day, a veritable clay mountain. It sits there and it keeps everybody in the pottery busy, and it has done for over 200 years. And it's mine and design's role to ensure that we convert that raw clay into something durable, beautiful, and versatile. We'll show drawings, and when we're confident we're on the right path, we start to make models or throw samples. So here I have the journey of a Christmas decoration. So the angel starts its life as a 3D printed model. And this is probably one of many that we discard until we agree the final design. Once agreed, it can be scaled up using CAD, and again, 3D printed. Liquid slip is poured into a cavity of a mold that's made from this. The resulting pot's fired at 980 degrees Celsius in what we lovingly refer to as biscuit. Then a spray of between 10 and 12,000 microns is applied and fired again, and the glaze will react with the body until fired to just under 1,200 degrees Celsius. Then be synonymous with its glaze, be it gloss, satin or matte. Thousands of hours are poured lovingly into not only finding the right depth of colour, driven by our insights into trends, but also the reaction of the glaze. Every day the team will be in discussion about the quality of, say, a satin glaze, has the right speckle been used, or general decorative effects. A wonderful glaze manager in our team will constantly adjusting and tweaking glaze recipes to find the sweet spot. Test cones such as this are used to quickly convert ideas into life and tones and tints refined to exacting standards. Today I've brought this colour wheel with me to give you a little insight into the lengths we go to. So a base glaze will be sprayed onto the plate, then painstakingly decorated colours are striped by hands around the outside. The plate's then fired for a second time, and this gives the designer a palette of colours to work with. But it might take someone a week to stripe all the plates for just one project. And then we also need to consider texture and print. We can add texture to the clay pots or the glaze. So here's a glaze pot with dimples. You can see the difference between my cup of coffee and the one that we've got here. You can see how it affects the glaze effect and how the challenges we need to consider for the tactile qualities as it's something that you guys are going to hold. Pottery often revolves not just around colour, but how the pot feels, its tactility. If it's a satin glaze, does it feel enough like a pebble? Is it silky smooth? And here we have an old pattern called green wheat that shows how we can also add decoration through lithography. A designer will usually hand paint a trial, then pass over the artwork to our print manager. She in turn will convert the artwork into a series of screen prints. Glaze is drawn through a series of fine mesh, layers of glaze slowly built onto a thermoflat paper, and once dry, a layer of cover coat is applied over the entire image. Once that's dry, the whole thing is left to gently separate in warm water, leaving a lithograph transfer that can be wrapped around the pot. Finally fired one last time until the litho sinks into the glaze and the cover coat burns away. Of course, taking all the above into account, the millions of possible glaze effects, texture combinations, variation of screen print and applying glaze at different thicknesses and fluctuations in firing temperatures, it's incredible how consistent the ware is. It's a constant challenge. The company's recently ventured into producing porcelain as well as stoneware, building an entire factory on the back of the existing site. And this opens even more opportunities for our design team to explore materials. We also deal with glass, cast iron, and placemats. We've also encouraged to explore and push boundaries, and have brought along a few products to share a few stories. The first of which I brought along purely so I could recreate a classic Bond villain moment. So you can see an original in my friend here in the museum. And I spoke to our amazing curator, Lynn, who you met earlier, and we believe the original's from around 1930s and modelled by Donald Gilbert. Now, this piece isn't original. Rather, it's recast from the original mould. And I love it. It's one of the few animals in our archive that isn't stylised. And it fascinates me for several reasons. Firstly, and it can't be ignored, she's quite plump. And my sense of curiosity is peaked that I can't find out why. When I've asked questions around the factory, the story goes that in the 30s and the 40s, cats employed to catch the rats would fall asleep at their own peril and curl up inside the warm casseroles as they slowly travelled along on the kiln trucks on the way into the kilns. Now, I hope there were no casualties, and I would like to think that my portly friend here was a champion rat catcher, and her size a result of being well fed and cared for over a long life. The next thing that grabs my attention is the muscle definition. The glaze somehow manages to not only reflect fur, but accentuate the muscle tone. And when you start to explore the neck and muscles and the spine and other features, you get a real sense for how detailed a piece of work this is. I can only admire the quality. Now, I couldn't understand all of that just by looking at the piece in the museum. I've had to recast it to get a true sense of the work. And the problem for me as a designer now is that unless I want to recreate a new model from scratch, how do I capture all those nuances? Now, if it was a plate or a bowl, I could easily ask Sean or one of our team of amazing throwers to get them to throw or turn some samples by hand. And for hundreds of years, that's exactly how potteries have worked, relying on skilled modelers and craftsmen to bring their own and designers' ideas to life. But where traditional skills stop, technology has now filled the gap. I hear touch used as a descriptor frequently, especially in technology. Touch screens, touch points, touch pads. And it's great to have all these wonderful things available at our fingertips: CAD, 3D printers, iPhones, scanners. So to recreate this cat, I used a handheld scanner, which I've got here, and it's appropriately called Sense. And basically all I've done is I've put the cat on a wheel and turned it round, and Sense has captured all the data for me. The digital file is then cleaned up and a copy 3D printed on site. And it's pretty standard practice in manufacturing these days. But the beauty of this process is that it allows me as a designer to start to manipulate the file. So for instance, I can change the scale. So here's a little sister, 3D printed in plaster. And if I want to make further changes from that, I can go back and start working digitally, or I can go back to the traditional hand techniques that we use. So why am I telling you all this? Well, I could have done all this without actually touching the object. I've seen examples of designers building objects purely using a computer. They don't need to physically touch anything other than a keyboard. And I'm sure even eventually haptics will make keyboards obsolete. But at Denby, we know the importance of holding something, to have the work in our hands, to have a human connection with a piece. So before we produce the 100,000 pots a week, or start to develop any new shapes, we have to know it's right. And it's a huge financial investment for our company. So before fully committing to production costs, we want to create samples, either glazed or as plaster models, to sit in front of us and debate. If it's a plate, we want to eat off it and check that, yes, it does hold enough gravy. If it's a mug, that it's comfortable to drink out of. And in this case, if it's a cat, I want to know she's in proportion. And who knows, eventually I might get to shave a few pounds off of her. The weight, the volume, the ergonomics, in fact, all the questions of a product that you ask, if possible, we want to answer first. So, back to the topic. It's just as important to talk about the story behind the products. It increases the emotional investment, how a range may touch someone. And I thought, in the week of Valentine's, that this double-handed heart was an appropriate example. So every year we present these to couples who come and have a go at throwing on Valentine's night, and they're kept as keepsakes. For the loving heart, one of my colleagues simply put two handles together while the handles were at clay stage. And I think it's quite symbolic. As Valentine's, they have a memento to hold. The handles form in the shape of a heart. And I think this handle demonstrates a balance between technology and craft. Creating mug handles is typical of how we used to work. For hundreds of years, a model maker would simply have sat with a lump of plaster and a drawing, carving away, until days or weeks later, they've got the final model. But as too often happened, if that model broke, they were back to square one. Now, to address that issue, we create the digital files in CAD, and then we can 3D print it. And it probably takes a few iterations checking for just the right curve, the balance and feel, but we can easily, if need be, reprint several variations to double check by hand, just in case it breaks. This has reduced it from hours to days to minutes. Like many of our experiences, we hope the double-handed heart helps create a story and a lasting memory. But just like the two handles connect, the couple can enjoy a lasting reminder of the evening. Of course, maybe like this morning, if the danger is that if the throwing didn't go so well, maybe we should start thinking about selling individual handles. So, why is touch important? Well, so I hope I've demonstrated to you this morning that any piece of creative work is so much more powerful with a story that accompanies it. A good story, and they're usually born out of our relationship with the object, how it feels. And working in a 200-year-old factory, there are pots and stories everywhere. If only the walls could talk. Sometimes, like getting your hands dirty while throwing, it's just the simple pleasures in life that are most important. Holding on to a warm cup of coffee or telling stories as here with new friends. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day, and please keep in touch. Thank you.